When I was an intern, the handbook in my clinic about dealing with newborn babies was the happiest baby on the block, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I really liked the ideas behind it, and I thought it was just well written, and it made a lot of sense to me from sort of a developmental and even at that time it wasn't even a thing, but a patient and family-centered sort of way of treating babies. And it was just really nice. And then I got to meet Harvey, and he is the author, if you aren't familiar with it. So he's a well-regarded, highly regarded expert in child development who some people, myself included, will consider him the Dr. Benjamin Spock for the new millennia. He really has spent his career really trying to help parents, and I want to really say that, help moms and dads with their babies and how to help them help their babies sort of transition from the first 3 trimesters through the 4th trimester and into sort of growing up into becoming healthy, happy children and hopefully adults. The reason why I started communicating with him is I do some tech work, and I happened to be looking at a tech journal, and I saw this really cool device, which is a new type of bassinet that you put the baby in a sleep sack, and you connect the sleep sack to the bassinet, and the bassinet actually monitors the baby and the crying of the baby, and will actually start to rock the baby and will give white noise. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. We have a subset of babies that we see here that are withdrawing from maternal drug use, neonatal abstinence syndrome, and I thought this would be a great device so that maybe we could decrease the amount of medication we need to use, maybe decrease nursing work on the babies and all of that, and maybe help get these babies out of the hospital a lot faster. So I sent an email to thehappiestbaby.com and didn't really expect to hear anything, and I got this wonderful email back, and we spoke on the phone, and he loved the idea, and he said, let me send you a couple. So we actually have a study that we're getting ready to actually enroll patients. It's all IRB approved, and we just are waiting on our first patients to start this study with this wonderful type of bassinet. And as we were talking, Dr. Karp had said, let me come out and talk to you guys about some stuff. And I said, hey, we have this wonderful conference. Would you be able to put it on your schedule? So right from a red eye from Los Angeles, I give you Dr. Harvey Karp.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And I think that's about all the information I want to give. So any other questions? Happy to be here. I spent a lot of time in Boston. I went to school, medical school down at Einstein, but my sister lives in Framingham. And actually, I was going to be a Mel Levine fellow here. And then I decided Los Angeles was a little bit too easy life. And I stayed out there. And then I practiced for about almost 30 years. In general pediatrics and child development before I started writing. And have any of you heard of the Happiest Baby or know the 5 S's, or just out of curiosity? So have any of you seen the video, the Happiest Baby video? Okay, a few of you. Okay, great. So this is a widely read parenting book, parent guide, but introduces some new concepts that I want to talk to you about. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is theory, maybe some new theory to those of you who are not familiar with these ideas, some of the research that's behind this, and some of the research that is currently underway for this rather challenging issue. Really, the number one issue for new parents, the number one stressor on new parents in many surveys is sleep. How do I get more sleep? And parents are struggling. It's not because they're wusses or wimps. It's because they don't have the support they're supposed to have. Up until, I mean, if you have a night nurse or a nanny today, you're pretty well off. Up until 100 years ago, everyone had 5 nannies, right? You had your grandmother, your aunt, your older sister, your next door neighbor's older daughter. We've stripped away that support for families. And on top of that, now families are single parents, or they're 2 parents who are workers. And so there's an additional amount of stress that's on families, and it's not going in a good place. It's leading to all sorts of dysfunction and serious issues, deaths, morbidity, mortality, as I'm going to go into. So I want to talk to you about something called the calming reflex, which is a new type of, or new suite of neonatal reflexes. I hope to convince you that this is more than just a theoretical construct. And then can we, by utilizing these principles, immediately, like in the first week of life, improve a baby's sleep, reduce a baby's crying, reduce colic. And by doing that, can we immediately today, right now, when you leave this room, prevent postpartum depression, infant sleep death, child abuse, and many other dysfunctions that are really related to this tip of the spear, which is persistent crying and exhaustion. And then can we do it all for the cost of breakfast? Because if I can convince you of that, then what we need to do is obvious to be able to protect the patients that we take care of. So I'm on the faculty at USC School of Medicine. These are my disclosures. I'm the CEO of this company called Happiest Baby on the Block. I write books. I sell DVDs. I sell these new beds that Mark was talking about. So you should be very skeptical of everything I say, which is appropriate for every speaker, I think. We need to be skeptical. But the interesting thing is, if I waited to get government funding to do the work I'm doing, to raise the millions of dollars I've been able to raise in an enterprise, it would take me 20 years to demonstrate the things that we're starting to demonstrate. So a mind once stretched to a new idea never returns to its original size. So that's my job, is to stretch your mind to the possibility that even though we've been around babies for decades and collectively hundreds of years, maybe there's some new things. Maybe there's some new things that we didn't realize before that could immediately affect the way we practice. So there are lots of myths about babies and taking care of babies. One myth is that when you're pregnant, you're eating for two, which is kind of true, but one of you only weighs 5 ounces, so portion size is an issue. And then that we used to say babies don't feel pain. I mean, when I was a medical student, we did circumcisions with no medication whatsoever, and we used to say crying is good for the lungs, which we know is not true at all. But there are a lot of things we think are true today which turn out not to be true. Some babies just cry. There's nothing you can do about it. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. We just have to wait 4 months, 5 months for babies to sleep better. And then if they're not doing better, we can do sleep training. I'm going to argue that that's also not true. We can improve infant sleep immediately in the first days and weeks of life. So change happens. We need to be flexible. When I was at medical school at Einstein, I was trained to prescribe for colicky babies. I prescribed phenobarbital, Valium, and paregoric, which is tincture of opium. I'd be put in jail today for doing that. But if I were giving this lecture 40 years ago, you all be writing down how many drops of paregoric to give, because that was what we thought was right. Car seats, obviously, that's something new. Back to sleep. I'm old enough to remember telling everyone, don't let your baby sleep on the back, right? Because they're going to choke on the vomit. And then, you know what I said yesterday? Well, that was completely wrong. Only let them sleep on the stomach. On the back. So we need to, like my mother used to say, keep your mind open, but don't let your brain fall out. So what are the things that we're currently thinking and doing that are going to turn out to be 180 degrees incorrect? What if I told you you could wave a magic wand, you could magically calm a crying baby in seconds, even colicky babies, and you can instantly add an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to a baby's sleep? Would that be valuable? Okay. So these are the new ideas. Number one, the 4th trimester, which is not a new idea. I mean, it's not my idea. I mean, people have talked about this for a long time, but it's the key idea for new parents. Our babies are not ready for the world. Of course they're ready. They got to get out. You can't keep them in any longer, but they're very immature by comparison to other mammals. And so the first rule for new parents is you are one big walking uterus. Hold your baby, rock your baby, shush your baby. If you're going to imitate the womb, you need to know what it's like in the womb. And it turns out it's a symphony of sensations. It is not quiet and still in there. Jiggly motion, sound louder than a vacuum cleaner, constant holding. And so the concept is that when you do these things, it's not that the baby is reminiscent of being in the womb and goes, oh yeah, that's like where I used to live. I love that. No, it's that it activates a reflex or a suite of reflexes that are a state-stabilizing reflex that I would call the calming reflex. And the ways that you can activate that, it's multimodality. And so they're vestibular, they're proprioceptive, they're oromotor, there are auditory parts of this reflex, what I call the 5 S's: swaddling, the side or stomach position, shushing, swinging, and sucking. And those aren't the only things that calm babies: skin to skin, going out for a walk, taking a warm bath. There are a lot of other things that work. But this is a mnemonic that's very easy for parents to master so that they can be much more competent with their babies. And when you learn these techniques, then the potential is to calm crying, improve sleep, and then reduce all of this morbidity and mortality related to those twin stressors. So here's me with and I'm going to talk fast because I've got a lot to share with you. This is a patient of mine. I taught them the 5 S's in the hospital. I taught it to them at the 2-week visit. Then I get a call. He's 6 weeks old. The mother says, I did everything you said. Nothing is working. So I made dozens of house calls to try to find out, when this didn't work, why does it not work? 95% of the time, if these techniques don't work, they're not being done correctly. If they're being done correctly and they don't work, that child needs a medical evaluation. So I'm going to come in and do the 5 S's, and I want you to tell if you can see the instant that this calming reflex gets activated. Did you see that? That is out. No, I'm kidding. Hold on 1 second. So the mother's not even doing anything at this point. She just gave up. So I'm going to come and do the 5 S's. First is swaddling. I want you to notice I'm going to put him on his stomach, and he actually calms a tiny bit. Watch what happens when he goes on his back.
Hold the corner down. I'm sorry, straightforward. And on your back. We're going to go down, up. You remember that one. First one is down, really snug. And very, very snug. Second arm is up. I've got both arms really snug. Then down a tiny bit.
The poor dog is trying to help out there. So that's the first test. That's swaddling. Second is side stomach. Third is shushing. Nothing much yet. Fourth is swinging. Now he's going to come into quiet alert state. He had been crying an hour and a half before he got there. Whoops, that stopped too soon. Within about 12 seconds, he was calmed. Within 10 minutes, he was asleep, and then he slept for an hour and a half. So was this baby crying because he had acid reflux, he had excess of E. coli and Klebsiella in the gut, or was he a rocket ship off a launch pad and just couldn't calm himself down? We now teach this in thousands. We've trained over 3,000 Happiest Baby educators in 20 nations, including across the state of Massachusetts in WIC programs, Emerson Hospital. I don't know if we're still teaching at Bay State, but anyway, we've taught it all across the state here. And this is a guy at the U.S. Naval Hospital in San Diego. Again, see if you can tell when the calming reflex gets turned on. You want to remember this the next time you're on a plane. That's a state change. That's not like a momentary distraction. Babies will either come into quiet alert or they'll go into sleep state depending on how tired they are. And the parents feel good. And actually, guys do this much better than women. Men are terrible at breastfeeding, but we're very, very good at baby calming. The wrapping is like an engineering job. Women tend to be a little bit more hesitant to kind of shh, shh. And guys will say, this is a book, but it's also a streaming video, and that's actually the main tool for learning this. In our educator programs, parents are taught this as a prenatal class. Then they're given the DVD or streaming video so they can practice it at home, show it to the mother-in-law and the boyfriend, and really master the techniques. Anyway, you have a baby, there are three main jobs you have. Feed the baby, calm the crying, get sleep. If you can do those three things, you feel pretty damn good about yourself. If you fail at any one of those three things, you feel incompetent. We have spent so much time and energy on feeding babies, which is appropriate. Almost nothing on calming crying and getting sleep, the other two things. In fact, we tell people, a lot of babies you can't calm. We tell people you just got to wait months and hopefully the baby will sleep better if you just wait long enough. We give people very little hope and very little intervention to be more successful. And it comes at a great price. It really wears them down. It's quite difficult to go month after month with sleep deprivation and dealing with crying babies. Now, we talk about colic and the rule of threes, and this is the traditional curve from Brazelton's work in the 1980s. Not much crying in the beginning. It peaks around 6 or 8 weeks, and by 3 months it's gone. We used to call colic the 3 months colic because by 3 months it's pretty much over. I'm trying to get the definition of colic changed from the rule of threes to the rule of sixes. The rule of threes says babies have colic if they cry 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. I think a much better definition is a baby has colic if they cry so much you feel like you need 6 hands, 6 nannies, and 6 margaritas by the end of the day. Because honestly, who gives a damn if they're crying 3 hours or 2 hours or 1 hour is enough to push somebody over the edge. So we're not even using the term colic anymore. It's really a garbage can term. Now we say, inconsolable crying or persistent crying or things like that, because we don't have any idea. We have no clue what's causing this, although I'm going to give you my theory about what causes it. 50% of babies in most studies will cry over 2 hours, cry and fuss over 2 hours a day. About 10% cry over 3 hours a day. So even Brazelton, who's our great hero, said, I don't know, put them in a dark room. They're overstimulated. Period of Purple Crying, which is taught all across the country now as a shaken baby prevention program, says it's normal for babies to cry up to 5 hours a day, which is completely untrue and unphysiologic. Like I said, I was trained in the early 70s to prescribe opium, but then I learned about the Kung San, which are a hunter-gatherer tribe in Africa. They've been studied by anthropologists. They could calm their crying babies in under a minute 95% of the time. And when I learned about that during my child development fellowship, it made me scratch my head and say, either those babies are mutant babies, or those parents know something that we had forgotten. And so exhaustion's a big deal. On average, parents are sleeping 6.5 hours a night, which doesn't sound so bad, except it's broken up in little pieces. So it's very inefficient sleep. U.S. Highway Safety Commission has shown that if you have one night of less than 6 hours of sleep, it doubles your risk of a serious car accident. One night of 4 hours or less increases your risk of a serious car accident 12 times. That's major impact. And why is that? Is because when you're tired, you're the equivalent of drunk. There are many car accidents caused by exhaustion as by drunk driving. This is a study done at Penn, which is a vigilance test, and they had college students sleeping either 6 hours a night or 8 hours a night, but that's a solid 6 hours a night. And what they showed is after 14 days, their vigilance test was now the equivalent of someone who was drunk. And that's solid 6 hours. That's not broken up into little pieces. So parents have it much tougher in terms of poor sleep efficacy. This is dangerous and expensive. It's the #1 trigger for sudden unexplained infant death. Why? Because parents bed share now. 70% of infant sleep death is associated with sleeping in an unsafe location. And why do parents do that? Because they're exhausted. It's the #1 trigger for shaken baby syndrome. #1 trigger is crying baby. Postpartum depression, I'm going to show you a couple of data points on that. Breastfeeding failure, car accidents, infant obesity, maternal obesity, overtreatment with drugs, too many ER visits, cigarette smoking, poor bonding, infant neglect, on and on. Billions of dollars of medical cost and billions of dollars of employer cost. Poor retention, poor productivity. More errors and accidents and healthcare costs. So this is not a trivial issue. This is one study by Marion Willinger at the National Institutes of Health. Look at this gray line. 82% of the people who put the baby to sleep on the stomach said they did it because my baby doesn't like to be on the back, meaning they cry more on the back. And so they were tempted to do the wrong thing. This is the biggest study I've been able to find out of the CDC. 30,000 women asked, why did you give up breastfeeding when you said you were going to do it longer? The number one reason women give up breastfeeding prematurely in the first month is because of technique issues, pain, tongue tie, things like that. But once you get past a month, the number one reason women give up breastfeeding prematurely is, I don't have enough milk or my baby doesn't like my milk. And that's not because the babies are failing to thrive. It's because the mother is interpreting the baby's frustration and lack of difficulty in calming as being a reflection of her ability to make milk. Shaken baby syndrome peaks at around 10 weeks of age with crying babies. Postpartum depression, this is a big study out of Norway. Normal moms, 2 months postpartum, average sleep 6.5 hours. Poor sleep was more provocative of postpartum depression than marital conflict, life stress, meaning poverty, or prior history of depression. That's great, because what that means is we're not going to do a lot about poverty overnight or prior history of depression, but if we can promote sleep, we have a real chance of making impact on postpartum depression. Another study out of Canada, 500 women, looking 1 and 2 months postpartum. If the baby cries a lot, Edinburgh Depression Scale is greater than 12, which is diagnostic of postpartum depression. If the baby cried a lot, it quadrupled the risk of postpartum depression. If the mother says, I just feel tired, it's not how many hours she sleeps, it's the subjective experience of fatigue. 28 times increased risk of postpartum depression at 1 month and 7 times increased risk at 2 months. Again, this is fantastic, because if we can reduce crying and increasing sleep, we have a great opportunity to reduce the impact of this problem. So how are we doing as doctors? How are we doing with sudden unexplained infant death and shaken baby and postpartum depression? I would tell you we're not doing very well. We're not doing very well at all. We know these are the big problems that we have to deal with young families. But I would say to you that our approaches are very overly simplistic and naive. So let's look at infant sleep death. So you all know this. There was just a study published, was it a month and a half ago or so, for the CDC data showing that over the last 20 years, we've barely moved the needle on infant sleep death. We saw a great decrease in the first 5-6 years after we introduced back to sleep, but we've pretty much been flatlined over the last 20 years. We tell people back to sleep. We tell them breastfeed. We tell them don't bed share. We tell them get soft bedding out of the bed. Don't cigarette smoke. We've made almost no progress. 3,500 deaths, 3,600 deaths in 1997, 3,700 deaths in 2015. We failed. Why did we fail? The reason we failed is because of back to sleep. And because we're naive. ABCs of sleep, alone on your back in a crib. Babies hate sleeping like that. You ever see a picture of what we recommend? A baby in a big crib, they're on their back. They've never been like that. That's the least physiologic way for a baby to sleep. Yes, the back is the right position, but like this, no. It leads to poor sleep efficacy in the child, which leads to crying, which leads to bed sharing. And that's the unintended consequence of what we're doing. We're causing deaths. We're causing deaths. We've decreased deaths from sleeping on the stomach, but we're driving people to bed share. Now 60 to 70% of breastfeeding mothers bed share by the end of the night. Actually, I'll show you one. Well, this is a general data point. This is from 2010, showing this increasing rate. Not much bed sharing back here when we first introduced back to sleep, but now it's steadily rising. And this ended in 2010. By now, it's 60 to 70% of parents are bed sharing sooner or later at one time during the evening. This is a study by Kathy Kendall Tackett with over 4,000 breastfeeding moms. 30% of them bed shared at the beginning of sleep, 60% of them bed shared by the end of the night. That's a problem. Studies show we increase the risk of sudden unexplained infant death by about tenfold in the first 3 months of life if the baby is bed sharing. Now we're talking about, well, we need to give them these boxes. Let's give them cardboard boxes. That's going to prevent infant sleep death. No, it's not. Even Cribs for Kids, great program. If people don't have a crib, they should be given something that's a safe place for the baby to sleep. But if they have a safe place to sleep, does that mean the parents use it? This is one of the few studies looking at that out of Department of Health of Wisconsin, showing that 75% of the SUA deaths occurred in an unsafe location, primarily in the parent's bed. 75% of those families had a safe location in their house, but they chose not to use it. And we're seeing that over and over and over again. Parents either bring the baby in bed because they think it's a good thing to do, or because they're just so tired they accidentally fall asleep with the baby in bed, or in a sofa, which is even more dangerous. So a study just published, about 6 months ago, showed that 56% of parents used a risky position at some time during the night, even though they knew not to do that, because they can't help themselves. They're just too tired. Parents are ignoring us because we're ignoring them. They're begging us, help my baby sleep better. And we're just telling them, well, you really can't do that. So, just be safe, just keep them on the back. And they're not listening to us. So what about shaken baby syndrome? Should we just put them down and walk away? That's what we recommend now. Well, there's no evidence that reduces shaken baby syndrome. And there's no evidence that walking away doesn't cause more problems, more depression, more abuse of the other child, more marital distress. It certainly causes more bed sharing. What about postpartum depression? Now we're talking about universal screening. Let's screen everybody for postpartum depression. Well, that's great, except what it means is we know 1 in 6 women are going to get depression or anxiety. We're waiting for them to get depressed. And then we're hoping they get screened, and we're hoping they get on treatment, and we're hoping the treatment works. But we know it's a sieve. Most of the people, I just saw a study from CHOP. I was just up at PAS meetings as well. A study from CHOP showed that of the women who were screened and had a positive screen, 75% of them never got psychiatric support. That's a CHOP. So we're terribly failing, and it's a failed system to wait. This is 1 in 6. We need a primary preventive modality. We can't just wait to do screening and hope to find them. So the interesting thing is these problems are all caused by the same symptomatology, which is crying and exhaustion. So to reduce these problems, we have to reduce crying and increase sleep. Super simple. So that's where we need to focus ourselves. And I have to tell you, I'm talking to the Academy over and over and over again, and there are almost no, like at the NCE, almost no discussions on how do you improve sleep efficacy. It's kind of like we're the lights are on, but nobody's home. The goal is not just to stop postpartum depression and infant sleep death and stop this vicious cycle. Equally important, let's start a virtuous cycle. Let's have people feel better rested, proud of themselves, super competent. I'm the best parent for this baby because I can calm my baby's crying in seconds. That's what we want to accomplish, and that's the opportunity. So why do babies cry? We talk about gas and bad bacteria and allergies and acid pain, and I'm not saying those things never happen, but they just almost never happen. It's 10% or less of colicky babies. So why am I so confident that these GI explanations are hot air? Number one, the crying goes away after 3 months. They still got E. coli and Klebsiella in their guts after 3 months. Why does it go away all of a sudden? Why don't premature babies have colic? Because they've got plenty of coliforms in their gut. And why does it get better with a car ride or turning on a vacuum cleaner? How many of you, quick show of hands, you have a really bad stomach ache and you say, honey, I gotta go for a car ride. If you know you're imitating the womb and activating this calming reflex, makes total sense. If you think you're treating abdominal pain, not so much. So one of the things we do forget is the gastrocolic reflex, right? So stomach fills with food, the intestine starts to move. Some sensitive babies interpret that as discomfort. And they arch and they double up and they cry. And then the mother calls the doctor and the doctor says, mother calls the doctor and says, my baby's crying. And we say, does your baby arch? Does your baby double up? Is your baby getting red? Oh, that sounds like acid pain. No, that sounds like an overreaction to the gastrocolic reflex. How do you tell the difference? Do the 5 S's. If the baby gets better in seconds, no medication, just more competent baby calming. So what causes colic? This is what I would submit to you is the cause of colic. Colic is an imbalance of stimuli. Too much chaotic stimulus. Too much absence of stimulus, too much total calm and quiet, minus the amount of rhythmic stimulus. The more rhythms, the more you walk with your baby, hold your baby, shush your baby, you're putting money in the bank. And that counterbalances all this other stuff, divided by the baby's temperament and state control. So if you have a baby with very rambunctious temperament or highly sensitive, they're going to be more blown out of the water by chaotic stimuli. If you have a baby with super good temperament, they're going to be able to tolerate it better. And these NAS babies that we're talking about are the ones that have poor state control. So that state control means that they're going to be more blown out of the water by just the normal excessive stimuli, and they need more rhythmic stimuli. This is what causes colic, and some of those stimuli are intestinal. Yeah, babies have gas, they have indigestion, they have to go to the bathroom, and all of those things factor in to the stimuli that they feel, but they're all counterbalanced by the rhythmic stimuli that we give them. So the missing fourth trimester is the key concept. Here's a horse, first day of life. Look at the head-to-body ratio. They don't get stuck by their heads. They get stuck by their bodies. They can run the first day of life. They have to run. That's how they survive. Our babies have big noggins, skinny little bodies. We have to get at, the head is what gets stuck. We have to deliver babies before they're more competent. And so we evict babies 3 months before they're ready for the womb. So if you buy that concept, then it means you have to imitate the womb. So what's it like in there? Like I said, constant rhythmic motion every time the mother breathes. The diaphragm is moving the baby up and down. The sound is louder than a vacuum cleaner, but it's not because babies are underwater. They're underwater, so the water filters out the high pitch, so they have more of a rumbly, low pitch kind of a sound. Any of you use white noise for your own sleep? Any of you used it with patients for sleep? Any of you use pillows for sleep? Any of you use pillows every night? So you're like addicted to pillows? So here's the thing. White noise is an enormously valuable tool, but white noise is very misunderstood or poorly understood. There are maybe 5 studies of white noise in the medical literature, even though millions of people use white noise. And millions of people will tell you, when I go in a car, in a train, in a plane, that sound, the sound of the wind, the ocean, it just settles me. I fall asleep with that. Why? What's the physiologic reason that we like hammocks, that we fall asleep in boats, we like to be held and rocked? What's the physiologic reason for that? It's never been explained. You can't point to a single research article about what's the basis of that universal human experience. It's related to this calming reflex. So parents have known for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, to hold, rock, and shush babies. But why does it work? Why do we fall asleep in trains and planes and cars? Why do we shush babies and rock them? Why do most languages around the world incorporate the sh or s sound in the words they use for be quiet? Silence, hush, stille, silencio, chup in Urdu, chuti in Serbian, sheket in Hebrew. It's because of this calming reflex. And the reason for this reflex is not to calm crying babies. Teleologically, the reason for this reflex has nothing to do with babies. It has to do with fetuses. Because as our brains grew, it became important for the last 2 months of pregnancy to keep that head in a vertex presentation down by the cervix. You don't want them swimming around too much. They'll get stuck in a transverse or a breech lie, and then they're going to die and their mothers are going to die. So all of you sitting here today are descendants of these Zen little babies who were put into a trance by the rhythms of the womb. And like all good neonatal reflexes, it's obligatory in the first 3-4 months, and then it wanes, and then becomes a conditioned response. So, what are the characteristics of a neonatal reflex or a primitive subcortical reflex? Exact input leads to an exact output. There's a threshold phenomenon. If you shush too quietly, nothing. A little louder, nothing. A little louder, boom. It's universal. It's present at birth and really about 6 or 8 weeks before birth, and it's obligatory, but it wanes. And that's what we see with these characteristics, except swaddling. Swaddling doesn't really turn on the calming reflex. Swaddling prepares a baby for the other things you're going to do. I mean, some babies do settle with swaddling, but a lot of them fight and cry more when you swaddle them, which confuses parents and doctors and nurses because they think, well, this baby doesn't like it, or this baby wants their arms out. This baby doesn't get a vote. With rights come responsibilities. And that's why people for thousands of years have wrapped babies' arms down. So swaddling, side stomach, shushing, swinging, and sucking, but you have to do them correctly or forget it, it doesn't work. You shush too quietly, nothing. You wrap them too loosely, makes them cry more. You put them on the side, roll to the back, nope. To the side, maybe towards the stomach, boom. It's a vestibular response. Swaddling is the cornerstone. If you don't swaddle, nothing else works well. Arms down, even though they cry and fight it at first. So we need to have a roundtable in pediatrics about swaddling. There's so much misinformation about this. 8 people tell you 20 different things about it. So confused. But there is a literature on this. There are data. So number one, studies that show, so one study by Odin, these are inner city moms in D.C., if they were taught to swaddle, they were 50% less likely to put the baby to sleep on the stomach. Significantly less likely. Another study by Kelly showed that if they were taught to swaddle, they were 50% less likely to bed share. Inner city population. Study by McDonnell and Moon looked at 8 years of Consumer Product Safety Commission reports about babies who died related to swaddle blankets. There were 22 deaths over an 8-year period. 12 of them related to regular swaddle blankets, 10 of them related to sleep sacks. So who says sleep sacks are safer than swaddle blankets? There's no evidence, even though people talk about that. 22 deaths, that's a tragedy. But look at the same 8-year period, there were over 1,000 deaths related to sofa sleeping. 22 deaths in an 8-year period. Millions of babies were swaddled during that 8-year period. Wouldn't you expect more, just by coincidence? You'd expect hundreds of babies to have died related to swaddling, and we only saw 22 reports. Indirectly, that's evidence that swaddling reduces the risk of infant sleep death. We don't know that for sure, but it's provocative information, and we should be very careful not to just write this off like the Academy is doing right now and saying, oh, at 2 months when a baby can start rolling over, you just have to stop swaddling. There's been no risk-benefit analysis. What happens when you stop swaddling? The baby wakes up and cries more. What happens then? Do you get more depression? Because postpartum depression is associated with more bed sharing. Do the parents bring the baby in bed more? Are they more at risk for shaken baby syndrome or car accidents? We need a really complete risk-benefit analysis, and it's never been done. And yet we're blithely saying, just stop swaddling babies. It's really naive of us. So this is the meta-analysis that the Academy is using now to talk about stopping swaddling at 2 months. We do not want babies on the stomach swaddled. I'll grant you that. But if you look at this, there's one outlier study which had a 1.7 odds risk of association between swaddling and SIDS. But most of the studies are really just barely at 1. And if you control for pillows, like this one by Ponsonby, actually there was a 0 significance if you control for pillow use. This one by Fleming didn't control for pillows, so we don't know about that. And this compares to a 10 times OR for bed sharing. So if swaddling reduces bed sharing, then in the mix of that, that's a good thing. So we need to be much more complex in our thinking about it, but we have to swaddle correctly. Don't overheat, keep them hip safe, stop the swaddling if they're rolling over, because again, we do know that swaddling on the stomach has a higher association with infant sleep death than even just sleeping on the stomach unswaddled. Are loose blankets a risk? We sometimes talk about that. Actually, the studies show probably not. Studies show that the risk of loose blankets are related to the density of the blanket. So if it's a duvet or a medium duvet, yes, that's associated with a risk. But Veneman and her colleagues in Germany did this study where they showed a light cotton blanket with, even when it got unwrapped and over the baby's face, was not associated with an increased risk. So like car seat safety, we have to teach swaddling. You can't just say use a car seat, right? They'll use it incorrectly. Half of all people still use them incorrectly, but we've still seen progress. But we need to teach what is correct swaddling. Otherwise, there's going to be all sorts of mischief going on and incorrect use, and the hips are going to be unsafe, etc. Is it okay for you to how many of you teach that when a baby can roll to the stomach, it's okay to leave them on the stomach? I mean, that's what the Academy teaches. Who said that? Who said babies are safe once they can roll to their stomach? Nobody. In fact, the studies show naive stomach sleepers, when they first roll over, have an 8 to 40 times increased risk of SIDS, or sudden unexplained infant death. The only reason we say it is we're trying to not drive parents crazy, to keep waking up and rolling them back and rolling them back. But there's no support for our position to tell parents, you know what, once they can sleep, just let them sleep on the stomach. No, it's bad science. Side stomach position is the second one. So see if you can see the calming reflex turned on in this baby.
As his crying simply melts away when I use some of the techniques you're about to learn. And then the last part is up and across. This is the felt that holds the whole wrap together. And pull it very tight.
Tighten the arms, but loosen the hips.
Now you can see that didn't calm him down. But now let's put him on his side.
So swaddling is one of the most complex things for parents. It's like origami, and everyone gets confused and stuff like that. So I'm going to show you this. And again, this is a proprietary. This is a product that we manufacture called Sleepy. It's just coming out on the market, but it has an inner band that keeps the arms down. It's not like the halo blanket that has outer bands which can ride up over the baby's face. There are many different ways of swaddling. The least expensive is just to learn how to do it with a regular blanket, but it is incumbent upon us to understand what are the different tools out there to help parents be most successful with that. So what about shushing? What about white noise? Can you see the calming reflex turned on? And look how the arms extend when the baby relaxes, down at the side. And when the baby gets upset, they flex. You want high-pitched sounds for calming crying, low-pitched sounds for promoting sleep. High-pitched sounds are irritating, actually. A lot of people, it disturbs sleep. So it isn't white noise. You have to pick the particular type of white noise to use, because they actually have high-pitched and low-pitched sounds have the opposite physiologic effect on people. High-pitch alerts you, right? Sirens, screams, beepers, alarms. Low-pitch rumbles, a car, a train, a plane, put you to sleep. So it isn't just sound. You have to be very careful about the type of sound you use. The fourth S is swinging or rhythmic motion. We all know about that. Obviously not shaken baby syndrome. And the fifth is sucking. Now, if these techniques don't work, like I said, 95% of the time they're not doing them correctly. That's why there's a book, but I don't even recommend the book. I do recommend the streaming video or the DVD, because this is like learning how to tie your shoelaces. And so it's a visual technique for most parents. And if that's not working, then these babies need a medical evaluation, like I said. So that's for calming crying, but what about for sleep? So for sleep, there are 3 things that have been demonstrated in the literature to improve sleep: swaddling, sound, and motion, which is basically what any grandmother is going to tell you, right? I'll hold and rock, and my baby loves this, you know? I mean, we all do it. It's been done for thousands of years. So there's nothing new there. But the question is, how do you do it all night long? And how do you do it safely? Swings, in 2016, the Academy came out and said no sleeping sitting up. Rock and plays, mama-roo, swings, things like car seats. Sound, we don't want too much sound, right? We don't want it out 24 hours a day. Swaddling, we want to keep the hips safe. We don't want them to get rolled onto their stomach. Very few studies have been done on white noise. This is one by Yvonne Brackbill, done in the 70s. These are brand new babies, but you can see as you increase the sound level, 75 decibels is a vacuum cleaner sound, you decrease wakefulness and you increase quiet sleep. And by the way, quiet sleep is believed to be the safer level of sleep. In other words, less SIDS occurs, we believe, in quiet sleep versus active sleep. So it turns out modern beds haven't changed in 1,000 years, probably in 3,000 years. They're just boxes that you put babies in. There's no technology. There's no advance to it. So they make sleep worse if you put the baby on the back, because the baby just feels like they're in free fall. So can we use the 5 S's to boost sleep and swaddle safely and keep them on their back? And this is a little baby in one of our prototypes. We did the initial study, several hundred babies here in Boston, actually, working with MIT Media Lab engineers, and that's not going to work. So anyway, if you saw that baby, and maybe I'll come back to that, the baby screams, 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 and after a couple of minutes of being jiggled and shushed, the baby just stops crying. A colicky baby, even with the arms out. But anyway, here's what it looks like with our current version of this bed, which is called SNOO. Or you could drive on the highway all night long in the middle of the night and get into a car accident. So what we see with people using SNOO, oh, don't tell me that. Urgh. Okay, I'll check.
Can you just review what the price of this is?
Yeah, you bet. Price is $1,160, which you might go, wow, that's like expensive for a baby bed. This is not a baby bed. This is a bed. It's a safest white noise machine, safest swing. It's an extra couple of hours of sleep. It's extra protection because the babies are secured. You can't quite see it in that one. You'll see it here. You can see these little wings that secure the baby to the bed. So once you put the baby down, they can't roll to an unsafe position. So it allows you to do swaddling as long as you need to. But most importantly, what this is your older sister. This is your older sister moved in and said, you know what? You sleep. I'm going to hold, rock, and shush the baby all night, and when the baby's hungry, I'll bring the baby to you. And that's what it does. It's an extra pair of hands. So $1,160 turns out to be $6 a day for the first 6 months. And if you sell it when you're done or use it with your second child, it's $2 to $3 a day, which you're kind of spending on coffee or Red Bull just to stay awake with your baby, you know? So is it for everybody? No. Is it for the impoverished population? Not yet, but we'll be getting there. So starting already now, we offer this as a rental bed to corporations, universities, etc., for $3.50 a day, which is not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, most corporations are spending that on coffee for their poor, tired employees. So Google, Hulu, Qualcomm, Facebook, et cetera, are all renting this now as a benefit for their population. And then starting next year, we're expecting we'll be starting to rent these like breast pumps for about $5 a day, $6 a day, something in that ballpark. And then as we get insurance companies on board, we'll be able to reduce that cost, just like we do with breast pumps. So that's the goal, because the opportunity is, and I can't believe this isn't working either. So this is the prototype. We can usually calm crying babies probably 80% of the time in under a minute. Unless they're hungry. If they're hungry, of course it won't work. Because this baby wasn't even swaddled. This is a colicky baby, had never been in the bed before, 6-week-old. And let's see if I can get this one going. No, that's not working. Oh, please. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, so what we're able to, if you look at the studies that have been done on sleep, this was done by my mentor, Holly Parmalee at UCLA. Here at 4 months, babies are still waking up once or so in the middle of the night. That's pretty normal. Most studies show that by 6 months of age, babies, about half, wake up once a night. And these are prone sleeping babies, where they're sleeping even better. If you put them on their back, it's 1 to 2 times a night. Here is a graph of a baby who is in SNOO. 1 month old, never in SNOO before. They're waking up 2-3 times, these vertical yellow lines in the middle of the night. And then after a month of being in the bed, the baby's sleeping a continuous 7, 8, 9 hours straight. And that's what we see for the vast majority of children, that in the first week of life, we're able to increase sleep about an hour, hour and a half. And by 2-3 months of age, we're able to entrain circadian rhythm, and babies are sleeping 7, 8, 9-hour stretches by 2 to 3 months, which is about 2 months earlier than we thought was even possible. So studies are now being done on this. Again, this has to, more research has to be done. But we're doing studies now. Very excited to be partnering with Mark here at South Shore on NAS babies. We've been studying NAS babies for about 3 months at University of Kentucky. That's the only bed that they use in their NAS unit now. University of California, San Diego is just about to start that. We're using the bed. We're studying sleep architecture down at Nova Southeast University in Fort Lauderdale. We have many studies looking at postpartum depression. At UCLA and UC San Diego, we've already seen that we've had about 16 severely depressed mothers on medication, in psychotherapy, on suicide watch often, who within a week have dramatic improvement of their postpartum depression because what they really needed was sleep. And now we're just launching a study at University of North Carolina and University of Michigan looking at the prevention of postpartum depression. And we're also looking to do studies. We haven't incorporated any studies yet, but we have a couple of universities interested in this, in studying sleep in the hospital after the baby is born. Because another unintended consequence, this time of baby-friendly, is that as we encourage skin-to-skin breastfeeding and rooming in, babies are falling asleep in bed with their mothers. And there have been deaths and accidents and babies falling out of bed, skull fractures, things like that. And what we're hoping is that if the mother had a caring bed, so this bed rocks and shushes all night long, and then it hears when the baby cries and rocks and shushes a little bit faster, a little bit louder. So you get that little jiggle that you saw before. And so the hope is that mothers will be less tempted to bring the baby in bed with them in the hospital because they have a caring nurse next to them to help them take care of the baby. So questions, motion and sound, all naps and nights? Yes, because that's what it is in the womb. That's why we do that. That's what babies love. Do they get addicted to motion? No. If you always rock and shush a baby and then you slide them into the bed, when they wake up in the middle of the night, they're going to go, where'd you go? So babies do get dependent on it, and it's a problem if we put them in a regular bed. But when they wake up and snoo, they've got that rhythm and sound going on, so it's like you're driving in the car and they just fall back asleep.
Does it continuously do that, or does it stop and start?
All night long. It's rocking them all night long. Again, the way they were rocked inside the womb. And so we don't see babies getting dependent. Babies are dependent on it from birth because that's what they had. So to go cold turkey is actually very non-physiologic for a baby. And then at 6 months of age, there's a weaning feature on the app that turns off the motion but keeps the sound. But if the baby gets upset, the motion will start again. And usually within a week, they're out of the bed. It's actually a very simple process. Is the head motion too jiggly? At the highest speed, the bed goes back and forth 1/4 of an inch. So that looks odd. But that's what a baby is doing when the mother's in an exercise class or going up and down the stairs. So shaken baby syndrome, as we know, is a much more robust and aggressive type of emotion. Does it reduce bonding? Is it like a robotic parent? Is it replacing parents? No, it's just kind of a sophisticated swing is all it is, just kind of helping keep the baby safe. And if the mom can get an extra hour of... They're not going to sleep 8 hours. You put them in the bed. They're going to get, like, instead of waking up every 2 to 3, they'll wake up every 3 to 4. And little by little, so that by 2-3 months, they've got this extended period of sleep. That's really what the goal is. It's about 5 or 6% of babies who do not respond well to this bed. The reason for that is these are side stomach babies. They don't want to be on the back. They want to sleep on top of you, next to you, cuddled in you, in a carrier. What we see with those babies is about 70% of those babies we can get to sleep and snoo, but we have to modify things. We have to give them a little bit more motion and sound to make up for the fact that we're not giving them the position that they want. And oftentimes we actually put something underneath their feet to get their hips bent and their knees up so they're in a little bit more of a fetal position instead of lying flat, which is not a comforting position for a lot of babies. And then, like I said, is it just for the wealthy? No, we've sold these from Maine to Mississippi, teachers, truckers, everybody in between is using them. Although it's an expense, no question about it. As I said, multiple studies going on, University of Amsterdam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've trained over 3,000 Happiest Baby educators in over 20 nations, including all across the United States and multiple health departments. And then you have happy families. So let me leave it there. And I'm sorry I talk so fast, but I'd be delighted to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
So do parents have access to seeing that video online, or do they have to purchase it? Like, if we wanted our parents to see how you did it, how can they...
To do the 5 S's, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are videos online, but what we distribute once you have a certified educator, then they're given the formal half-hour video. Because it isn't just... This is an interesting part of this. Many people teach the 5 S's now. But that doesn't mean that parents have learned it. In other words, you can make a lot of mistakes. You can swaddle, your baby resists it, and you lose confidence. You can remember side stomach is a good thing, but you forget it's not for sleep. Or you forget the difference between swinging and shaking a baby. And so to maintain fidelity to the model, it's important that parents be given either the DVD, or today really it's the streaming video. And so when they take a class, they're given that streaming video so they can practice at home, they can show it to the mother-in-law, they can show it to the boyfriend or the other caregivers, because everyone needs to get on board with that. And while they're very simple techniques, they're not quite as easy as they would seem. It's almost magical the first time you see it. But once they get to be 5-6 weeks old, right, they struggle more. They're a little bit tougher to calm down. So it turns out to really be effective. It isn't just show it to them and then they're good to go. So we're looking for, actually, I'm just talking now here, actually in Boston, with the March of Dimes to start teaching this, for example, in the NICUs. Because we teach CPR, we teach breastfeeding. What are we doing about sleep and crying? Because these parents fall off the cliff when they go home, right? They get so stressed out because they don't have that extra help. This is curious. This bed is curious because it gives these babies who didn't even get the 3rd trimester the motion and sound that they really missed out on. And we're also looking for hospitals to start studying this with growing preemies. We published a study last year at UCLA just with our white noise, showing that with 36, it was a little pilot study, but we showed with 36 weekers, we were able to, just by using our white noise, we were able to reduce bradycardic and hypoxemic episodes. We didn't reduce apneas, but I believe with the bed, we'll also see that we can reduce apneas and maybe even improve weight gain, things like that.
What is the power source?
So it's plugged into the wall, and it uses about a 4-watt amount of energy, like a 4-watt light bulb. And then there's an app that allows you to change the settings. So for some babies, like I said, like these ones who don't want to sleep on their backs, they need to have a little bit more motion and sound all night long. Again, like you're driving in the car or you're living on a boat. And you can block the motion. For some babies don't like to go like that. Or with premature babies, we don't want them to jiggle too much. So there's a motion limiting setting so that you can get the sound levels, but you won't get too much of the motion levels. And you can pick the sensitivity. Some babies don't cry loudly, and it doesn't even trigger the bed. Some babies are loud snorers, and they're not crying, and you don't want to over-trigger the bed. And we delay the motion for about 15 seconds before it goes to the next level so babies can begin to learn self-soothing rather than the bed always taking over for them. So, yes, ma'am.
I just have a question separate from Sue about what you advise parents regarding letting their baby cry.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have a 1-month-old who is not hungry and feeding well, and the parents use these techniques to help the baby fall asleep, and then 25 minutes later, the baby's crying. What would you advise those parents?
Well, 2 things. One is oftentimes the baby's still hungry. Even though the baby just fed, they need just a ½ ounce, an ounce more feeding. And so always the first thing is feed your baby, especially a 1-month-old, because they're still gaining their weight. The second thing is making sure they're swaddling correctly, because if they're not and the baby can oots like this, actually it disturbs them more. And the third thing is to make sure that they're using a good white noise source. That's not too high pitched, that's a little bit low pitched and rumbly, and it's about as loud as a shower. A lot of people just do the swaddling and they think that's enough, but swaddling is not enough, because once the baby gets to be 2 months or 3 months and they start waking up, they start getting into their sleep regression periods, the swaddling bothers them, and they're in total quiet, which is weird because by now they're social, they want to be in the party, right? And so that's what I would recommend for those families.
As a follow-up to that, I guess what would you say is a reasonable amount of time to see if your baby's going to settle? Because I do worry about parents feeling that they can't let their baby cry for a
Sure.
period of time. And personally, I had 3 kids, and my third ended up being the colicky one. So just the nature of life was such that she had to cry it out and or be by herself crying while I was attending the 2 other little kids.
Sure.
And I think in some ways that was a more sane experience. I often think if she had been my first, every single peep I would have just been there.
You would have been insane, yeah. Exactly.
So I wonder about that and how you would, you mentioned not telling parents to let the child cry, but I wanted to hear more.
Sure. Well, one of your biggest jobs with a new baby is to develop, help the baby develop attachment. And attachment basically means security and trust. And that security and trust is built upon reproducible and effective and timely interventions. So the baby's hungry and suddenly a breast comes and feeds them over and over and over again. The baby cries and arms come and pick them up. And when that happens hundreds and hundreds of times, the baby develops secure attachment, which becomes the foundation of their relationships and their sense of intimacy for the rest of their life. That doesn't mean if the baby cries, you've screwed up attachment. You're in the shower, the baby cried. All right, that happened, So it's not the one-time event. It's this hundreds of times event that really builds this experience and anticipation of the baby. So in general, I would say never let your baby cry. If it happens, okay, you're driving the car, the baby's crying in the back of the car. What are you going to do? But in general, the parent should be responding to the baby's need and trying to fulfill it as well as possible. And if feeding and holding doesn't do it, then hopefully the 5 S's will. And if that doesn't do it, then you try to find out if there's something else that you're missing. Does that answer it? Cool. Yes, ma'am.
I was always tell them, in the first 1, 2, maybe 3 months of life, you can't snuggle with them, So in general, at least until 1 or 2 months, I would say don't let them cry it out.
Right. And I think most people would say that. In the womb, they're being held, rocked, and shushed 24/7. So when you do it 14 hours a day, which feels like a lot from your perspective, from the baby's perspective, it's a ripoff, right? Hey, you used to do this 24 hours a day. So I think that's right. That's where this 4th trimester metaphor is helpful for parents, because when you see it from that point of view, you go, oh, okay, now I get it. This is why the baby needs it. And you let them know, you know what, 9 months, 12 months, you're going to set limits. You're not going to always give you can let it, sweetheart, you can cry as long as you want. You're not going to get another cookie or whatever limit you want to set. That's a different story. And people conflate those two and get confused. Cool. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate coming. Thank you.